Alan, welcome to the Democratizing SEO podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, Austine. Good to be with you today.
Oh, pleasure to have you on. Today we're going to talk about the role of knowledge graphs for fair digital twins. And I saw on your site, on your LinkedIn rather, that you have a very acute interest around knowledge graphs. I'm quite curious. You're someone who follows emerging tech. How did you venture into knowledge graphs?
I spent a good long time at PwC, 20 years in the emerging tech area, and from their perspective, PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, has a lot of Fortune 50, Fortune 500 clients, and they're public companies typically. So PwC is one of the big four. They've got audit, tax, and advisory. And I joined the advisory part of the firm and really just started working on tracking enterprise IT trends. And the idea at that point was to be a more objective equivalent to Gartner and to be an internal as well as an external service. So it started as an internal service just so that the consultants could get the straight skinny on what the trends were. Um, and then almost immediately, the consultants wanted to share the materials with their clients. So we became an external publication house. So I've been an analyst for 30 years. I was in the semiconductor industry before I came to PwC. So PwC really introduced me to the realm of enterprise IT. And where it got really interesting was on the data and analytics side. When that started to heat up with the big data trend in the early late 2000s. And then I got into the semantic web. We did a whole report on the semantic web and so-called in 2009. This is pre knowledge graph. We were building knowledge graphs, but we didn't know it then. So, um, of course, Google came up with the phraseology knowledge graph in 2012. So I've just sort of been preoccupied with that whole approach to shareable information, shareable knowledge, contextualized computing. Since then, I feel like it needs a lot more attention than it's getting. It's getting more attention, but it's still sort of being drowned out by all the trendy stuff that's happening. So I'm an advocate for this realm that's it's harder to do, but the payoff is um, substantial and it's can be very efficient and rewarding in a number of ways.
I remember the early, well, mid to late 2000s when big data was quite a thing. It was seen as the holy grail or in business. Nowadays, however, it seems as though having data and labels is not enough anymore. Why is knowledge graphs now the more important thing to have rather than simply big data?
Yeah, and we sort of discovered through trial and error that data lakes in and of themselves in the 2010s, early 2010s, people started experimenting with data lakes, and really they were solving a problem with the initial data lakes, which was making the information accessible. So you were just copying the information that needed to be shared and putting it in the lake. And immediately, what the issue was that you were making a data swamp rather than a data lake. And so thus the need for a semantic layer to make sense of it all. And it just goes back to what you're trying to do ultimately. And I think that I before I was before I was in the semiconductor industry, I was in the Navy in intelligence, and I used to collect my own data, collecting voice traffic and analyzing it. And you know, you really have to adhere to a proper data lifecycle strategy to do this the right way. And the application centric ecosystem that enterprises have been using ever since the IBM PC and Microsoft, it just does not allow data to be in first position like it should be, so that you can do what you need to with it, share it the way you need to, contextualize it when you need to. And so, I think that we're starting to learn how important this stuff is, and it's going to take another 20 years for most people to really realize it. But there's going to be quite a bit of interest in this topic soon, I think.
Oh yeah, I for one am very fascinated with it. And I'm interested in the way big tech overall are utilizing knowledge graphs, especially from a web point of view and particularly from a search point of view. And the biggest player in search, of course, is Google. Their mission is to organize the world's information, right? I recently came across two terms which I'd like to explore with you. The term FAIR, FAIR, and DT. What do these two terms stand for?
Well, if you're talking about DT, you're talking about digital transformation,
Oh,
perhaps.
I came across
Um,
digital twin.
oh, digital twins. Uh-huh. So, let me give you a thumbnail sketch of digital twin as it has existed and why it's being used in a somewhat different fashion now. Um, are you getting any noise in the background, Austine?
No, all good. All
No?
good.
Okay, good. Good. So I used to go to all sorts of conferences when I was at PwC because I was covering so many different things, and it gave me a system level perspective for what was happening. So, in the case of the front end and the back end, I used to go to these augmented reality and virtual reality conferences. And there was an obsession, a preoccupation with digital twins a few years ago when I went to one of these conferences. And they had a couple of guys up on stage talking about the topic. And one of them was Kevin Kelly, who was the co founder of Wired magazine, written a lot of books over the years, very bright guy. And he had written an article for Wired called The Mirror World or something along those lines. And so his term mirror world described what he envisioned as a digital twin. So you've got the physical world, and then you've got the represented world, and the represented world is the mirror of the physical world. And in addition to that, just pure mirror, you have the additional things that you can create that aren't physical, but they're conceptualized so that humans can work together and work with machines in the whole ecosystem in new ways. So the thing about the augmented reality and virtual reality, it's all the attention is on the front end. And so what Kevin Kelly wasn't really addressing was there's all this stuff on the back end that has to be in place before you can have interactive digital twins, interoperable digital twins. So that leads to this other term, which is FAIR. And FAIR stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So if you're in a supply chain scenario, for example, you've got to share a lot of information. And a lot of the reason we have supply chain bottlenecks right now is because there's insufficient sharing going on, or it's not timely enough or accurate enough to be useful. So you've got this situation where you can build digital twins, but you're really thinking about the back end rather than the presentation layer. You're not thinking about the goggles or the artificial reality, the augmented reality glasses or the contact lenses or the other optics. It's all about getting the data to do what it's supposed to do so that you can share without just all this complexity exploding. So it really takes this intentional design at the level of each twin. And GE came up with its conceptualization of digital twin um, a number of years ago, when they were trying to articulate, how a gas turbine was operating, for example. So their vision of a digital twin was, we want to be able to predict failures in the equipment that we're building. And they were building these large turbines. They build jet engines. I met some of the people who are working on those projects, and they took a knowledge graph approach to managing the data, the information, the knowledge that's required to inform these digital twins. And some of them ended up spinning off a company that can't remember the name of it, but it is focused on their digital twin platform, which is also a knowledge graph platform. So if it makes sense, you want every twin to be fair so it can be interoperable with other twins. And that's the only way you get to a mirror world. All this front end stuff doesn't matter if you can't share sufficiently so you can interact and be interoperable with the other things in the ecosystem.
When I think of a digital twin, I there's certain things that jump out to me. One is social media. And there was this point in time when Mark Zuckerberg stated in an interview, I forget the name of the interview, but it was an interview where he stated you have one identity. And I almost use that as a marking point in time to state, okay, if we people have a social media profile, is that a form, a digital twin of who we are in real life?
It's a starting point, and I think that you need the dynamism of data that flows rather than data that's static. You need basically streaming information in the fully realized concept. Now some data changes a lot, some doesn't change at all, and there's everything in between. So you really have to map this out along perishability continuum and think about, what you need to address in terms of things that do change and then handle those appropriately. So there's some complexity here. I don't know if I answered your question.
You did. So my train of thought around DTs is, if we're all on social media, and that in a sense is people as a DT, essentially, but in a very basic form. If this is the case, can we reasonably assume that when it comes to people as information types, social media uses knowledge graphs technology better than search products, specifically Google search?
Yeah, well, I mean, you could think of Google and Facebook and the other social media companies as data farms, essentially. So you've incentivized the sharing of data, and the beneficiaries have been those companies in large part. So you've got the data farming operation, and so you've got this continually created information that's useful in a social realm. And what's missing from the mix here is the context models. So you're just capturing these flows of information bits, but you're not really modeling the context to make it come together. And so what happens is that there's a disconnect there. So knowledge graphs provide this logical context so that work can get done. Um, and the social media companies are doing a lot with their person graphs, their interest graphs. At the same time, they're sort of getting in their own way by just trying to automate absolutely everything and take humans out of the loop in some ways. And I think humans need to be in the loop for the modeling process. So there has to be a feedback response loop. For every person that's participating in social media, for example, and Google was doing this for a while, you have this back and forth between Google and setting up your profile. I thought it was kind of fascinating. I could tweak my profile and see certain things happen. Um, that hasn't been the case recently, as far as I can tell. But maybe I'm just not plugged in well enough.
If big data, when it was very popular, even just as a terminology, resulted in a company having power, and knowledge graphs are far more valuable than big data, what does a knowledge graph give to the big tech companies?
Well, I think that we're in a situation of inequality where the proactive are thriving. The ones who have they're operating on all eight cylinders, if to use the car metaphor. You've got a car engine that's operating on all eight cylinders. They can do everything they need to do to drive around, these companies. And so, they've got the finance part of it worked out, as well as, the social engineering aspect of it. And then they've got the technology worked out to a certain extent. And so that's a complex picture to really manage. And so the consumer gets left behind in a lot of cases because they don't have the resources that these big companies do. So, in 100 years ago, 120 years ago, you had the Teddy Roosevelts of the world who would say, you know, um, let's do some antitrust legislation so that we can rope these oil companies in at that point. I think there's noise about antitrust today, but governments are comparatively a lot weaker than they were 120 years ago.
Yeah,
I
I
think there needs to
completely.
be a balance between the business and the government, and it just doesn't exist right now.
No, it totally doesn't. With the big tech companies, and assuming they all have knowledge graphs of some sort, and I'm certain they do, um, and all of their products and all services have some sort of search functionality. What does this do to companies like Google that have a search product that's predominantly dominant within the market space? Does it change the search landscape, or keep it relatively the same?
Well, that's a good question. I don't have a great answer. I think that incumbents like to, they're driven to protect their market position. So once you get to be, a company that has $1 trillion in market capitalization, then you've got huge market position by definition, and you want to protect that market position. So you might be resistant to certain changes as a result. So well, these companies talk a lot about innovation, and they certainly have huge research arms that are doing a lot of interesting things. But what you're seeing is a lot of this research doesn't really end up in the mix in commercial product. And I think they have to have a business rationale to make changes that they want to make. And similarly, if they want to keep things the same, to keep the cash flow, that's what they'll do too. So incumbency is an issue for that reason, and that's why disruption can be desirable. But it's part of the whole capitalist society we live in.
Companies like Google, they're doing any and everything they can to ensure they maintain their market share. As an end user of search, do you expect to be able to find anything you want within reason when you search for something?
It's getting harder and harder. I've been on the internet since the 90s, pre-web, and um, when I was in the Navy, I was overseeing some contracts and grants at universities, and they had a wonderful internet capability. Um, but the more, and it was all academic at that point. The academics were all out there, and they had an interest in sharing broadly. It's all open, and now you've got all these silos, and you've got all these recommendations, and I have been a Quora user for many years, and I'm getting more frustrated with it because I can't get out of the silos that it keeps putting me in. And if I'm not just interested in five things, I might be interested in 50 things or more, and my interests change. And how does the core algorithm know that? And basically, all I have the option to do in Quora is pick topic areas. So I've got this assemblage of topic areas, and I'm not really finding what I really think would be the most interesting things would be to me in the moment. Um, and so I think that's characteristic of all the social media that's out there. I'm a YouTube fan. I love what YouTube does. I mean, I'm a woodworker in my spare time, and there's fantastic woodworking videos on YouTube. Um, but you have this siloing effect in YouTube as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I've noticed it as well. Even within search, the whole personalization has very much narrowed the results, and it perhaps could be the what's the phrase? The enshittification of search. But that's
Yeah,
just like we have with social media, we could have that with search as well. Do you think it's a case of
yeah.
their knowledge graphs that they have of us needs to be more expansive, or is it a case of the knowledge graph itself is the problem that's creating that silo?
Um, I think tools are tools, and it's how they're used. It's what the strategy is. It's what the overarching system looks like, and it's what's emphasized and what's de-emphasized. So knowledge graphs, as they've been born, that's a very open concept, and really, Tim Berners-Lee was behind the semantic web. We've had you know. Uh, the evolution of those standards that continues, the semantic web standards, and those are being used more and more in enterprises. And so that approach, the open web approach, where you've got open standards, is very beneficial to the consumer. And the problem has been that the user experience lacks, because the open web stuff doesn't have the funding that the closed web stuff does. So the closed web basically took over in the 2000s, and so people like Tim Berners-Lee are clawing, trying to get the open web back in people's minds here, and so they won't be going into these closed parts of the web. And Web3 provides an opportunity for more openness, more so you don't have to use people's infrastructure so much. You can use a peer-to-peer method to store your data, for example, and it's just hard to use right now. The Web3 stuff is hard to use, and it's dominated by the blockchain mentality right now, which it's, when you get money in the picture and cryptocurrency and NFTs and things, it sort of clouds the picture. We didn't have that cloudy picture in the initial open web. So a lot of the people that I've banded together with over the years, they're open web advocates, and they have been ever since the web was started. And we're still open web advocates. And the pure knowledge graph approach embraces the open web, and it embraces decentralization. So there's it's advocacy at an individual level for individual users ultimately.
What is an example of an open and closed web?
Well, I think let's take it from an enterprise perspective to begin with. Large companies. Large companies pretty much use proprietary products because they don't trust the open source stuff as much, and that's not universally the case. Obviously, Linux gained adoption in the enterprise. But in the case of the open web standards, they were sort of antithetical to the way companies were working. So an example would be you've got the proprietary suites that the Microsofts of the world have had in enterprises for many years. Oracle, IBM, others have had for many years. And those might, they'll have components of the web that they service, and they have for years, if not decades. And these companies were very interested in web, but then they turned it to their own purposes. So if you're in one of those environments, then you're part of the closed web. The purely open web is pretty raw. It's like the Wild West, and you're depending on small providers who haven't gotten too big for their britches, but they don't have the resources to really make the user experience what it needs to be. So it's only a very small percentage of people that are really taking full advantage of it.
When I think of the open web, I think, yes, it's I see the benefits of it. On the other hand, I say to myself, it does away with personalization. And the way the world has evolved, everything is very much personalized when you're online. So doesn't having an open web mean personalization is out of the window?
I think it's because of the fragmentation, Austine, that you're talking about. You've got so many piece parts that you have to deal with just to get something done. And if you had a more cohesive environment and more functionality in one place, then you could do some personalization, and you could make it suitable for individuals and individual users to be able to tune it the way they wanted to. If you had publicly funded entities that were backing this sort of thing, and they could inject quite a bit of capital into the situation, we could have that environment. But governments don't tend to be forward enough in their thinking or their action to really make that possible. You could have private concerns doing the same thing, and They probably are doing that sort of thing, but there's not enough funding to make a difference at this point. So again, this fragmentation, the stuff is not coming together because we have a lack of capital, basically.
What is your favorite search engine?
I haven't been privacy sensitive in some ways. In other ways, it's a maddening situation seeing what's happened to copyrighted information recently. I write for Data Science Central. I want people to reuse what I write, but if I've developed a book, for example, or information that I'm trying to sell, then it's annoying to see somebody just lift it and use it, particularly a big company. So this generative AI stuff, um, I think it's really intriguing what they've done, but again, you've got governments absent from the picture of trying to rein these people in. So they're just scraping the public web all over the place, and so that's my initial reaction to your question anyway. I don't know if that answered the question.
Information is a very interesting area for me because I'm seeing entire businesses and industries. In fact, the news organizations are big. They find information, access to information, a huge problem for their entire industry. Where would you say that balance is between having information accessible to everyone? And I'll be the first one to say I'm a big fan of Google. In fact, search overall, whenever I need information, search is always my go-to place. I think I search more than I ask people face to face for information that I'm seeking. So I'm a big fan of information. However, as you just indicated, it can be a problem for businesses. So where would you say that balance is between having information accessible yet not stealing it, essentially?
Yeah, it's a great question, and you know, most companies I've been in, and public sector organizations that I've been in, they're very controlling with their information, and um, you had this very tight control over what how things were done information wise, and there wasn't a lot of sharing going on inside these organizations, certainly not enough. And then you had the open web, and it was like a totally radically different approach, created by academics, and it's just mind expanding. So you have this back and forth between organizations that feel like they need all this control, and they aren't addressing their own organizational problems that have to do with siloed departments. So you've got the content management department, you've got the data management department, you've got the knowledge management department. Those people aren't working together because they're in different pieces of the information ecosystem, right?
Mhm.
Um, they could be working together, and the graph could bring them together and use unified methods, unitary methods to solve these problems that they have with access. And so in a graph environment, you're eliminating silos, but at the same time, you're articulating the access control. So this gets complicated, but you can tune the access to your specific requirements because of the articulation of the graph and the logic that should be built into it. So that's where we should be headed. And I'm not saying that that's going to solve the problems people have because, um, it's a huge issue, and
Oh yeah.
people are involved. So it's going to take organizations evolving, and you're going to have a few organizations that are ahead of the rest, and then the rest are going to be struggling.
Yeah, it's a very pertinent conversation that needs to be had, especially with governments of the world, because if we're considering the control of the information, who gets to control it? Is it big tech? Is it users? Is it government?
Yeah.
Who gets to turn that dial and essentially control the dial? That's an area that I think will be very fascinating in the years to come, especially in the EU, because they're very they take um privacy to another level. They're should I say strict
Yeah.
about their privacy, and rightfully so, I think.
Yeah. I I appreciate the what the EU is trying to do, and so I think they need to understand the context about what I just talked about more. So that and really putting the data first rather than the AI first. Enacting these AI acts basically puts the focus on the algorithm, and that's not solving the data problem. The data problem has to be solved first. And
The
so it's an
I
access control issue.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
totally. The I in fair interoperable. What does this mean?
It means you can use, if you have the access, you can use the information in a digital twin as your own information, essentially. So um, let's contrast that with the application-centric approach, which you've designed an application, you've got your database that you use with your application. And so whenever have, you want to access somebody else's database, you have to deal with this data model issue, which is you had your own data model that you used to create your database for your application, and then somebody else has their own data model with their database. So basically, what you want is one unified model, and the good knowledge graphs allow this um, model abstraction, if you will, so that you have upper ontologies, you've got taxonomies, you've got in between, you've got other domain specific ontologies. And you've got this web that you're creating of a model that's shareable. So once you have that shareable model, um, then twins can be interoperable. And so basically, what you're sharing is concepts and context with that model. So you've got this logical interconnection of content on concepts and how they're related to context, specific context, and then you've got the overall umbrella of context that it all belongs as part of a sort of an ecosystem level view. So it takes time to build this stuff, but that's really the only way you can have data sharing at the level you really need it for the level of automation they're talking about with artificial general intelligence.
So let's use an example here. Let's say big tech, Amazon, Apple, Google, those three. They all have a knowledge graph of myself, and I am on different products that they have. Can those products talk to each other to ascertain information about me? Is that a form of interoperable?
I think there's mixed motives in doing that sort of thing at that level. Um, and that's not to say that companies haven't explored more interoperability. I think Blue Sky, for example, in the social media space, has at least envisioned some greater level of interoperability between platforms. Um, these ideas come into view, and some of the big companies try to take advantage of them, but they don't seem to have any lasting effect. So I don't know that uh, there's not. It doesn't seem like there's lasting interoperability between these big players. Apple's pretty much been realistic about it, saying, we're going to have our own thing. We're gonna basically mandate our own thing, and it's sort of maddening the way they approach it. But maybe they're just being realistic.
If a knowledge graph about myself is extensive, does this mean the company can better service my needs when I'm online on the web?
Oh, of course. And that's the dilemma, isn't it? You're sort of giving up your personal information so that you can have a better experience. Um, it's it's sort of an absurd situation, isn't it? It's like, oh my God, the stuff that we're actually sharing so we can do this, but I kind of figure I'm going to be dead in 30 years. Who cares? But but it's like you don't have the control, you don't have the visibility. Those things are frustrating to me. I'm not that personal with my information, but it's like I wish things were designed so that my family and I were better protected in my community. Because
As a
people
business.
come into you're like a community organizer. You know the situation with communities. You try to open up to people, and then some people really try to take advantage of what you're doing. So it's a tough situation.
As businesses online, we're pretty much reliant on these big tech companies to at, at the very least attain traffic, right, from them. Whenever we attain traffic via them, we're attaining their a piece of their user base. So, and in a sense, if you think about it, the richer the knowledge graphs of businesses online, the better these big tech companies can position our services as businesses to potential users. So is it beneficial for businesses to have that knowledge graph extensively known by big tech?
Yeah, and it's I come from a consulting firm, so I'll say it depends. It depends on the business, depends on the user. Uh, I think ideally, yes. Ideally, you want that interaction, and that's where the power comes. The power comes from the interaction, the full interoperability of the communities together. That's you want that power, and so these other things are getting in the way because you don't have consistent trust that manifests itself in a big enough way to really achieve these things. And so that's why the public sector is important as well as the private to try and enable trust. And there needs to be a lot more clarity on how that trust is enabled. And I think that, we're working that angle, but we feel like we're voices in the wilderness sometimes.
Looking into the future, where would you say we're headed with AI and the way they use knowledge graphs?
It's sort of the 10% rule, or 20%. It's like, there is quite a bit of buzz about knowledge graphs and the knowledge graph market right now. I saw a research firm forecast that had the installed base in 2023 is 900 million, almost $1 billion. That's pretty small, considering that semantic web has been around since what, 2001. I mean, it's 20 years, 25 years almost. And it just because it's taken so long to try to do it right, and we keep going through these iterations of doing it wrong. So we're gonna see AI doing it wrong, but not really being accountable for it, because they're going to see some payoffs in the statistical methods they're using. These are going to be useful enough on their own that they can avoid doing the hard work of building the logic in these graphs and making it shareable and interoperable. So, until we get to a point where we're forced to use these graphs the way we have to use them, then I think AI is just going to be inhibited. It's not going to be full artificial general intelligence. So you really need to fix the data problem before you can get to artificial general intelligence. So you need quality information that is contextualized to have contextual computing. Contextual computing is what is the precursor, should be the precursor to artificial general intelligence. And until enough people understand that to get a critical mass going, we're not going to really see artificial general intelligence. What we're going to see is a lot of mess and a lot of social angst and disruption. And some people are going to be getting away with murder, and other people are going to be just victims of it. It's not going to be as bad as the movies make out, but there's this relative unease that many people are feeling right now. I think that's going to increase, and it really means that individuals need to be proactive in how they make this change, how the whole society makes this change. And if you're not proactive, then you're going to be a victim. Because the more power ends up in individual hands, the more the power of the few becomes the problem. And so individuals need to come in and be represented in the solution, or they're just going to get lost and they're going to be victims. So there's a lot of proactive effort that needs to happen over the next 20 years. And I try to encourage it, but I don't think it's going to be enough. So I'm sort of dreading the next 20 years.
Wow. Lastly, Alan, when you think of smart technology, that term was branded for quite a long time, a little over a while ago. And we have smart TVs. Anything with a smart technology is considered a smart sort of like device. And there was this connectivity with smart that we as general public we're sold on. Is this connectivity already here, or is there more work to do?
Well, we use terms pretty loosely in the technology space, as you know, and I sort of think from my perspective, I think of it as fishing. So smart's a buzzword. And some people might be interested in that buzzword. So that's your fishing lure that you put in the water to try to catch those fish that are looking for smart. And then there are people who are looking for cloud and digital transformation. You name your buzzword, there's going to be a fishing lure for those people that are searching on that buzzword. So the buzzwords are useful. It doesn't mean like they're anywhere near what they're promising. And it's not just computer technology. You go back to dishwashers, for example. You got your dishwasher, and you see these ads today that say, "Oh, you just shove your dishes in there. You don't need to rinse them off. They'll get clean. We've got this handled." You can't do that. You have to rinse your dishes off before you put them in the dishwasher. But they were making those same claims 50 years ago with dishwashers. Oh, you don't need to rinse your dishes 50 years ago. They still haven't gotten to the point with dishwashers where you can just shove your dishes in and think that they're going to be clean when you pull them out. So it's this marketing machine that the US has been uh, instrumental in developing this marketing machine it's awesome in some ways, but it's just disinformation in other ways.
The next 10 to 20 years for me is going to be very fascinating, and I'll be interested to see where we head up, especially with this whole digital twin aspect, because on one hand I can see it being very Black Mirror-ish. On the other hand, I think of all the benefits and how it will make life so much easier from my SEO point of view. But that's a discussion for another time. Alan, where's the best place for people to find you online?
LinkedIn's the best place to find me, and they've got a good social media system there too. So I post quite a bit there. I share my articles there, and I'm looking forward to the digital twins and how they're going to evolve. And basically, I've got community connections that I'm working with good people like yourself that are going to be doing the right things with these twins. And so that's what's getting me excited is these community efforts that end up being really fascinating, and that's what gets me up in the morning. So I look forward to anybody who wants to reach out via LinkedIn and have some conversation.
Awesome. Awesome. I'll have your LinkedIn in the description so people can get in touch with you.
Okay,
Alan,
sure.
thanks so much for your time today. It's been a very fascinating discussion, and um, we'll catch up again another time.
Yeah, I'd like to. And thanks for the opportunity.
Pleasure. Pleasure. Cheers.